Good. We can start our meeting. I'm going to record it in the Ukrainian channel, and Sarah is going to record it in the English channel. So if you do not want to appear on screen, please switch off your cameras. I'm putting the recording on. Hello, dear colleagues. Again, my name is Svetlana Melnik, and we are starting our next seminar. And our presenter today is Yevhen Rachkov, who is the candidate of historical sciences and the docent of the chair of history in the National Kharkiv Karazin University. His interests include cultural heritage, the history of city, and historical IT. And today he will be talking about reconsideration of cultural heritage and decolonization of memory in Ukraine during the Russian-Ukrainian war. I'm going to share my presentation with you. I hope you can see my screen. Thank you. Hello, everyone. First of all, I want to join the words of gratitude at the beginning of the seminar and say thank you to Sarah, Svetlana, and all other organizers of this program for the possibility of doing our research. I'm happy that I'm part of the research which is done within this program. Thank you for the access to the resources of the library of your university. And I also appreciate the help of my supervisor who is giving me support with my research. Today, I am going to talk about a reconsideration of cultural heritage during the Russian-Ukrainian war. I'm going to speak in Ukrainian, but my presentation will be in English. So within my report, I'm going to look at several points. First of all, I'm going to speak about the current state of cultural heritage of Ukraine. Then I will explain why it is important to preserve cultural heritage times of war. I will tell why and what is happening now in Ukraine. We will look at several cases, including the example of the building of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration. And at the end, I will talk about a research project, City and War, which is dedicated to preservation and reconsideration of cultural of Ukraine's heritage during the war. I invited several people to join the seminar and really appreciate your joining it. So, what is happening with the cultural heritage in Ukraine now? As we all know, since 2014, Russia's military aggression against Ukraine has resulted in significant human losses and destruction. A lot of religious buildings, memorials, monuments have been damaged. We have lost a lot of museums, libraries, and other cultural institutions. And according to the experts, the losses really exceed those of the Second World War. The number of confirmed damage to the cultural heritage exceeds 550. As of May 10, UNESCO confirmed damage of 255 sites since February 24th. The most affected regions were Donetsk, Kharkiv, Luhansk, Kyiv, Chernihiv, Sumy, and Zaporizhia. According to the Ministry of Culture and Information Policy of Ukraine, as of May 2023, 1,464 cultural infrastructure facilities were damaged. And of course, cultural heritage continues to suffer losses, especially in the occupied territories, where hostilities are still ongoing. Recording for destroyed, damaged, cultural heritage sites are an important component of documenting the crimes of the Russian army and the legal actions of Russian occupation authorities. Today, we have a number of digital projects dedicated to this issue. Sometimes you will see them on the screen. And I want to say that the data presented on the slide only relates to those cultural sites that are included in the State Register of National Cultural Heritage and have the official status of cultural heritage and are protected by law. At the same time, there are some other sites which do not have this official status of cultural heritage and are not recorded anyway. It should be noted that the Russian aggression against Ukraine has not only led to new threats and challenges to cultural heritage, it also triggered the actualization of many old problems related to legal, organizational, financial, logistical, informational, other aspects of protection of cultural heritage in Ukraine. National Institute of Strategic Studies in 2019 analyzed the legal problems of cultural heritage preservation, and they recognized that protection of cultural heritage is still problematic area. Among the problems that adversely affect the implementation of the state policy on preservation of cultural heritage is the lack of a unified system of state management of cultural heritage protection, unjustified restrictions on the powers of cultural heritage protection bodies, and weakness of current legislation in determining liability for damage to cultural heritage, and the lack of full-fledged information research of cultural heritage. So, realizing these problems of protecting Ukraine's cultural heritage and trying to find a system solution, the Ministry of Culture in July 2022 announced the construction of a new cultural heritage ecosystem. Here, two important components will be digitalization of the Museum Fund of Ukraine and creation of a single open register of electronic records of movable and immovable heritage sites. So it should promote deeper integration of Ukraine to the wider primary European cultural space. And of course, we can. It's very early to talk about some results of this structure. Why is cultural heritage important? When we study the problems of preserving and reconsidering Ukraine's cultural heritage, it is important to define what exactly belongs to it. So, such simple questions require some explanation, especially given that understanding cultural heritage itself has undergone fundamental changes in the second half of the 20th and early 21st century. Today, cultural heritage includes material objects, urban development, architecture, infrastructure, memorials, monuments, and intangible values, celebrations, festivals, culinary traditions, language. Together, they form a kind of historical and cultural landscape that embodies and influences the formation of cultural values and collective identity. So cultural heritage can have an official status. It means it can be included in the list of cultural heritage items at the national and international levels. And it should also be noted that there is cultural heritage which is recognized by various communities, but does not have an official status. Despite the formal recognition of cultural heritage, it is a fundamental source of individual and group identity, vitality, solidarity for local communities. It is important to take into account the integrative effect of cultural heritage. It is usually located on cultural, historical, social, other boundaries that connect different communities. So the international documents emphasize the importance of protecting public spaces, historical landscape, cultural traditions. It should be noted that cultural heritage represents not only positive historical experience and values, but it can also include the legacy of violence associated with the memory of wars, genocides. For example, for Ukraine, such legacy is the memory of the victims of the genocide of the Crimean Tatar people, political repression, communist and Nazi totalitarian regimes. In general, Ukraine's cultural heritage is characterized by a significant number of sites, typological and species diversity. According to official data, it includes over 140,000 monuments of architecture, archaeology, and monumental art of national and local importance, as well as 12 million museum objects which are stored in more than 4.5 thousand national, local, and other museums. The issue of legal regulation of cultural heritage deserves special attention. It is carried out on the basis of national legislation and international law. The regulatory acts of Ukraine that define the principles of cultural heritage include the law of Ukraine on museums and museum affairs, on protection of cultural heritage, on protection of archaeological heritage, on culture. However, experts emphasize significant shortcomings in the legal mechanism for the protection of Ukraine cultural heritage. For example, they note imperfection of the cultural heritage management system and inconsistency of measures of protection of cultural heritage, especially it refers to the construction and land use issues. Ukraine has also some positive things about it. For example, Ukraine joined international agreements on the prohibition of destruction, looting, and confiscation of cultural property during hostilities and occupation of the territory of other countries. This relates to the Hague Convention. In 2020, Ukraine assessed the second protocol to the Hague Convention for the protection of cultural property in the event of armed conflict.
Including UNESCO, ICOM International Council of Museum, ICCROM International Center for the Study, Preservation and Restoration of Culture Property, ICOMOS International Council on Monuments and Sites, etc. Starting to 2014, their organization I have mentioned and other organizations, they condemn the violation of the Ukraine's territorial integrity and sovereignty and call for the prevention of damage to its cultural heritage. The result of this international cooperation has resulted in the granting of World Heritage status to some of Ukrainian cultural heritage sites after February 24th, 2022. For I guess you already know this example. In July 2022, UNESCO added the culture of cooking Ukrainian borscht to the list of intangible cultural heritage in the need of urgent protection. On January 25th, 2023, at an extraordinary session, the UNESCO World Heritage Committee approved the inclusion of the historic center of the port city of Odessa into the UNESCO list of World Heritage and Gender. Now let's discuss the issue of decolonization of Ukraine historical memory and cultural heritage in time of war. It should be noted that the Russian military aggression against Ukraine not only led to significant destruction and damage to cultural heritage, but also became a trigger for its rethinking. Today, Ukrainian society is undergoing a kind of turnaround in understanding and attitudes towards cultural heritage. An important component of this turnaround was a critical reconsideration of Russian imperial and Soviet heritage. This process becomes more understandable if we look at them through the prism of so-called decolonization of historical memory. It should be noted, it should be borne in mind that the issue of Ukraine's colonial past is now an important part of the national memory policy and media discourse. As for media discourse, we can observe it every day, various news reports, various analytical materials, And as for national memory policy, it's also more or less obvious. And it's curious that according to the sociological survey of adult residents of Ukraine, conducted in January 2023 by the Kyiv International Institute of Sociology, 64% of respondents agree with the statement that Ukraine was a colony of the Russian Empire, 31% disagree, and 5% do not haven't decided on the answer to this question. In general, a considerable number of studies have been devoted to the post-colonial peculiarities of political and socio-cultural processes taking place in Ukrainian society. Recognizing the specificity of the colonial relationships between Russia and Ukraine, many researchers emphasize the colonial nature of the Russian-Ukrainian war, including American historian and writer Timothy Snyder, Ukrainian historian and politician Volodymyr Vetrovich, and others. Post-colonial theory has become especially popular for explaining the causes of the Russian-Ukrainian conflict as well as the preconditions and characteristics of the modern critical rethinking of Ukrainian culture, in particular cultural heritage. At the same time, in contemporary Ukrainian media discourse and scholarly literature, the term decolonization is used alongside other terms, particularly the Russification and decommunization. It should be noted that the meaning of these terms is not established. There are many variants of the interpretation depending on the context. It should be noted that during 1990s and early 2000s, the cultural and historical landscape of Ukraine remained rather eclectic. The process of cleansing of post-communist landscape in Ukraine was sporadic and the most noticeable in the western regions of the country. A significant part of the Russian imperial and Soviet heritage in various forms, monuments, memorials, components of ritual practices was adapted to new political and cultural context and was permanently used by various actors of historical policy in Ukraine. In turn, the rethinking of these components of cultural heritage was not properly implemented in practice and ultimately served as one of the foundations of social political contradictions in the so-called memory wars. Since 2014, the process of rethinking the cultural heritage, which was accompanied by the destruction of old and construction of new monuments and plaques, renaming of street names and squares after the prohibition of old and the establishment of new festive and commemorative symbols practice has activized. The key triggers of this process were the events of the Euro Revolution, the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and the outbreak of war in the eastern Ukraine. One can argue that the large-scale invasion of Ukraine by Russian troops provoked another wave of rethinking of cultural heritage, in particular expressed in dismantling of monuments of the imperial and Soviet periods, changes in place names, and reformative of museum exhibitions, audits of library collections, etc. Perhaps it is the dismantling of monuments and memorials that caused the greatest resonance. According to some estimates, since February 24, hundreds of Soviet-era monuments have been dismantled in Ukraine, but there are no official statistics on this issue. There is no official data, while the published official data is much smaller. If the Euro Revolution led to demolition of monuments to mostly communist figure, primary here we should mention so-called Lenin fall. Then after February 24, 2022, the wave of monument demolitions affected monuments dedicated to various figures and events of the Russian Empire and the USSR. An illustrative example is the Pushkin Fall that has covered a large part of Ukraine. According to the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory, starting from February 24, 2022 in Ukraine, at least 34 monuments to Pushkin were dismantled. It should be borne in mind that the destruction of monuments is an act full of symbolism. However, the perception of these changes, for example, by local communities, may differ according to the meanings that these communities were assigned to certain components of symbolic space and cultural heritage. Among the sites of open civil and sometimes this reformatting of public space relates to open confrontations, and among the site of open civil confrontation related to cultural heritage, the Kiev Pechesk Lavra National Reserves should be mentioned first and foremost. As many of you know, in 1992, the key purchase Clavra, among the St. Sophia Cathedral and adjacent monastic buildings, were included in the UNESCO World Heritage List. For a long time, the Lavra state-owned facilities have been used free of charge by the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, which is in unity with the Moscow Patriarchate. December 31st, 2022, the lease agreement by the of this cathedral and the refectory church expired, and the Ministry of Culture Information Policy recommended not to extend the lease, citing the presidential decree on religious organization personal sanctions in Ukraine. In turn, in early March 2023, the National Reserve, the Kiev Pechevsk Lavra, announced the termination of the lease agreement with the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, starting from March, effective after March 29th. The clergy of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church not only refused to leave the site, but also obstructed the work of law enforcement agency along with unknown civic activists. However, on April 15th, a new acting director general of the National Reserve was appointed. It was Maxim Ostapenko, who headed the halted the National Reserve between 27 2022 and on April 1st, the Security Service of Ukraine served notice of suspicion to the leader of the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, Pavlo. As you know, this is a very influential figure in Ukrainian Orthodox Church and infamous due to a number of outrageous events. At the end of March on 2023, on the territory of the Kiev-Pechevsk site, the Commission for the Acceptance and Transfer of the State Property started its work. The Commission recorded violations of the use of certain Lavra facilities, and as of early May, it has inspected only a third of the total number of facilities, and naming 27 out of 79 buildings. On May 11th, an exhibition was opened in the refectory chamber, which has returned to state control. And this exhibition is dedicated to the Ukrainian religious buildings damaged during full-time invasion. It should be noted that the confrontation around Kiev Pechevsk Lavra illustrates the existence of significant problem in the field of protection of Ukrainian cultural heritage. In addition, it serves as an illustrative example, since the decolonization of Ukrainian cultural heritage includes not only overcoming the consequences of Russian cultural influence and the Soviet legacy, but it's more complex process. It seems it's an important component of kind of symbolic restitution, symbolic return of cultural heritage, as well as the transformation of cultural heritage into a contact zone for various communities. Thus, the basis for the decolonization of Ukraine's cultural heritage in wartime is a post-colonial narrative. At the same time, many actors of historical policy in Ukraine advocate another narrative that can be realized in the field of cultural heritage without provoking further wars of memory. It should be borne in mind that the process of decolonization of country can only take place in the context of open public dialogue. The colonization of culture is interconnected with the decolonization of historical memory, which is characteristic of countries that have liberated themselves from totalitarian or authoritarian regimes. The elites of such country usually turn to traditional memory that was destroyed or distorted in the favor by the previous regime, and its significance. The colonization of Ukrainian cultural heritage is based not so much on the use of control narratives or culture conflict. I mean, not rejecting everything which is foreign, but rather on the search and construction of own identity and culture. An illustrative example of the growing public interest in Ukrainian traditional cultural pattern, including intangible cultural heritage, for example. Today, the national list includes 68 elements of tangible,
where 42 were included during July-May of the 2022-2023. It should be noted that replenishment of the national list with new elements of intangible cultural heritage can be regarded as the first step towards research protection of such elements. Formation and updating of lists should make a priority in protection of intangible cultural heritage, and special role here should be played by local communities. In general, various mnemonic actors are active participants in the process of rethinking of the cultural heritage of Ukraine in the context of war. They have a decisive influence on development and implementation of historical policy. First of all, these are state institutions, non-governmental organizations, mass media, online communities. This division is rather arbitrary, but we should note that all actors of historical policy in Ukraine are more or less systematic, and they try to influence the cultural heritage sector, making it an integral component and tool of memory policy. The legislative basis for this in particular is the decommunization package of laws. This is the law of Ukraine on condemnation prohibition of propaganda of Russian imperial policy in Ukraine, which was adopted in 2022. Among the state institutions that define the strategy of cultural heritage are the Ministry of Culture and the Ukrainian Institute of National Memory. In particular, the ministry has an expert council on overcoming the consequences of Russification and totalitarianization. So they develop recommendations for cleansing public space from Russian imperial and Soviet totalitarian heritage. However, local authorities and civic activists currently have a decisive influence on the process of transforming Ukraine's public space and cultural heritage. Now I propose to look at the case of the building of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration to illustrate some aspects of the process of decolonization of Ukraine's cultural heritage. As you know, in March 2022, Russian troops launched a missile attack on Kharkiv, and as the result, the building of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration was partially destroyed. Videos and photos of the missile strike and its consequences were widely disseminated in the media. Shortly after the strike, the leadership of the Kharkiv region, citing the conclusion of the special commission, declared that it was impossible to restore the building. However, many architects, restorers, historians, and others disagree with this conclusion and offer many options for its restoration. There is also a vivid discussion in mass media on the further fate of this building. And this discussion takes into consideration different aspects. The importance of the building as the site of local heritage. And somehow it turned to be the example of representation of the new discourse of heritage in Ukraine, which was shaped by the Russian-Ukrainian war. The building of Kharkiv administration has a rather interesting history. I'm not going to go through the details. I just want to say that at the end of the 19th century, there was the building of provincial zemstvo built here, and after the October Revolution 1917, when Kharkiv became the capital of the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic, this building was occupied by the Central Committee of the Communist Party. At the beginning of the 1930s, it was reconstructed in the style of constructivism, but during the Second World War, it suffered great damage. And the building which you can see now, this is the third version of the building. It's the construction of the modern building was going from 1951 to 1954. And its architectural style can be defined as post-war Soviet neoclassicism. Sometimes you can see them named as Stalinist Empire, Stalinist Art Deco, Stalinist Neo-Renaissance. Almost all Soviet guidebooks on Kharkiv pay special attention to this building. It became the part of architectural ensemble of the Dzerzhinsky Square, and which also intensified the significance of this, that it was just placed in this square. Starting from 1930s, Dzerzhinsky Square turned into the main object of the city. It was home to two of the main architectural symbols of Soviet Kharkiv, the House of State Industry and a 20-meter high monument to Lenin, which was erected in 1963 and toppled in September 2014. So Maidan is the place to a lot of important political and national cultural events. The building also became a symbol of reconstruction of Kharkiv after the Second World War. The city was damaged a lot by bombardment and shelling of Nazis, and it became one of the symbols of Soviet power after the war. It was depicted on different postcards and was very often you could see it together with other monumental places. When Ukraine was declared independent, the building's administrative purpose was preserved. Now the building housed the Kharkiv Regional State Administration and Regional Council. These Soviet symbols were remained on the main facade for a long time, but very soon the five-pointed star was replaced with a small state emblem of Ukraine, but some elements of Soviet symbolism survived till today. This building is officially recognized as a monument of urban planning and architecture of local importance. Now it has the name of the building of the Regional Committee of the Communist Party of Ukraine, and is such included in the State Register of Immovable Monuments of History and Monumental Art of Ukraine. It's also a part of architectural ensemble of the Freedom Square, and it is situated opposite the State Industry Building, which was included in the UNESCO World Heritage List. The building of Kharkiv State Administration became a place of important events of the modern Ukrainian history. In particular, it was confrontation during the Euro Revolution, 2013-2014. Here, they signed so-called Kharkiv agreements in 2010, according to which the Russian fleet could stay in Crimea and Sebastopol for 25 years. And the Kharkiv's administration became one of the epicenters of confrontation between the pro-European Maidan and pro-Russian anti-Maidan. On March 1st, the building was stormed by anti-Maidan protesters, and during this storming, the anti-Maidan activists occupied the building, and they arranged for Euromaidan activists the so-called corridor of shame. The activists were beaten, taken out of the buildings, and they were forced to kneel down. After the seizure of the government building, the Ukrainian flag on the roof was torn down and the flag of Russia was installed. But in the evening, the anti-Maidan protesters left the building and the Russian flag was removed. So it was staying there for 45 minutes in total. According to official reports, 97 people were injured during the assault. But on April 6, it was the second time that anti-Maidan protests seized the building. The next day, pro-Russian rally declared creation of a sovereign Kharkiv People's Republic, which lasted for one day. In the evening, police vacated the building of the regional state administration from the separatists, which were still trying to regain control. They were using stones, traumatic weapons. At night, pro-Russian activists again seized the building, but in the morning, the internal troops of the Ministry of Internal Affairs freed the building again. It should be noted that the struggle for the building actually led to its damage. The total damage was estimated at several million hryvnias. But these events led to the building acquiring new symbolic meanings. It was no longer perceived as the administrative building of the Soviet architectural heritage, as the events associated with it now were taking an important place in the mythology of the Euro Revolution. It was a symbol of struggle for independence. An illustrative example in the story of Euromaidan activists rescuing the Ukrainian flag from the Kharkiv administration, which was returned to the building in October 2016. And in the ceremony, the leadership of Kharkiv region and the president of Ukraine, Petro Poroshenko, took part. After the annexation of Crimea by Russia, and the outbreak of war in eastern Ukraine, a public memorial was created in front of this administration in honor of those who were killed in Euromaidan and in anti-terrorist operation zone. National symbols, portraits, components such as everything for victory signs, they became the important items for this museum. The building took even more symbolic significance after the large-scale military invasion of Ukraine. On the morning, the Russian troops had an attack on Kharkiv, and they ruined the building.
So according to the Kharkiv Regional Prosecutor's officer, 41 person was killed in the attack, and this public memorial in front of the building was also damaged. In the evening of August 28, Russian troops launched another missile strike on the downtown of Kharkiv. As a result of the shelling, a crater measuring 10 meters wide and 10 meters long and almost 5 meters deep was formed in front of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration building on March 1st, 2023, a year after the missile strike against the Kharkiv Regional Administration buildings. Kharkiv residents honored the memory of soldiers and volunteers who died as a result of the shelling, and public memorial was erected near the main facade of the building in form of a poster with the names and photos of the fallen soldiers and volunteers, as well as flowers. As already noted, the destruction of the building of Kharkiv Regional State Administration sparked a vivid, lively discussion in media and social media about its future. And within this discussion, the building is primary context, and the main controversy revolves around the conceptual and material consequences of the process of critical rethinking of cultural heritage, primary Russian imperial and Soviet heritage provoked by the Russian-Ukrainian war. In fact, the discussion around Kharkiv Regional State Administration building represents several conceptual directions. It can be conditionally called decolonization, renovation, and revalorization. As for decolonization, the main opinion of the supporters of this direction is that it's inexpedient to restore the building of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration, primarily because it's an example, as I mentioned, of Soviet Stalinist architecture, a reminder of Ukraine's colonial dependence on Russia. This view is currently fueled by the official policy of memory, which is being implemented in the direction of derussification, decommunization, and decolonization. In turn, on the site of the building destroyed in a missile strike, it's advised to build another administrative building with modern infrastructure. The construction of a new building is meant to signify a symbolic victory over the Soviet heritage and mythology of Kharkiv, which is still called the first capital because it was the capital of the Ukrainian Socialist Soviet Republic. The decolonization vision is pretty popular among representatives of both state and municipal authorities, as well as among the general public. And renovation, it's another direction, it's another attitude, and according to which the Kharkiv Regional State Administration building should be restored despite it being the Soviet heritage. In particular, civilian is defended by the local authorities. Also, after the missile strike, many of local officials emphasized the impossibility of restoring the buildings. For example, I can quote the head of the Kharkiv Regional Military Administration, Alexei Gubov, who changed his opinion regarding the possibility to restore the building several times, but I won't do it due to the lack of time. I will just say that in one of his interviews in May 2022, he mentioned that that soon the reconstruction project will be developed and the works are in progress. In addition, many experts in the field of cultural heritage, architects, historians, local historians support the restoration of Kharkiv Regional State Administration building. An illustrative example is the Ghost of Kharkiv Regional State Administration project implemented by the Constructivism Kharkiv Group. The project aims to advocate for the building by reconstructing its history since the late 19th century to the present. The project description states that This approach will help to discuss complex issues of memories of the totalitarian past and raise the discussion amongst architectural heritage of the Soviet period in society. It should be noted that the renovation vision is devoid of nostalgic intentions for Soviet past. On the contrary, the representatives of renovation attitude emphasize the importance of preserving the building as a component of the Soviet heritage, which primarily represents negative historical experience and values associated with the legacy of violence, the memory of victims of the communist tyrant regime and the Russian-Ukrainian war. And the third attitude is revalorization. As you know, revalorization is a set of measures aimed at enhancing the architectural and artistic value of individual buildings, complexes, and symbols. Revalorizations involves a number of measures such as museumification, restoration of monuments, reconstruction, and modernization of historical buildings. Given that the destruction of Kharkiv RSA building as a result of Russian missile strike turned it into one of the symbols of the Russian-Ukrainian wars, discussion participants supported various ideas for the reconstruction of the building, which aimed to strengthen the significance of the building and symbolic space of this modern Kharkiv. Perhaps one of the most famous is the concept of modernizing the building, proposed by the British architect Norman Foster. Since April 2022, the architects team has been working on the master plan for the restoration of Kharkiv for free, together with Ukrainian specialists. This cooperation was initiated by Kharkiv Mayor Igor Terehov. The developed master plan includes 5 projects, including the Heritage Project, which involves the restoration of architectural monuments and improvement of historical city downtown. Particular attention was paid to the reconstruction of the Kharkiv RSA building reconstruction, which is to be established as as one of the key symbols of Russian-Ukrainian war. Norman Foster proposed to preserve the historical facade, but to completely renovate the building's interior. The plan is reminiscent of the architect's previous work with reconstruction of Berlin Reichstag building, which is emphasized by both the architect and the mayor of Kharkiv. It should be noted that Norman Foster's plan for the post-war reconstruction of Kharkiv has both supporters and critics. For example, after the publication of certain provisions of the plan, there are concerns that proposed idea are too complex and expensive for the city. In addition, the principle of working with the cultural heritage are still not clear enough. Kharkiv architect Oleg Drozdov notes that the strategic plan for the reconstruction of Kharkiv should be focused primarily on the citizen, while hasty decision can harm the city, so the reconstruction process should be more thoughtful. Thus, to summarize, I would like to note that the building of the Kharkiv Regional State Administration is indicative as an example of the representation of the conversation discourse that directly affects the preservation and rethinking of Ukraine cultural heritage. And the decision on subsequent fate of the building may affect the reconstruction, the colonization of other cultural sites damaged during the Russian-Ukrainian war, and discussion about this building indicates the complexity of the process of rethinking cultural projects and help to develop the new strategies of working with such sites related to Soviet and Soviet heritage. So it may become as an example of looking for social dialogue and political consensus or indicate so on the condition of developing the strategy for rebuilding Ukraine and the process of rethinking cultural heritage, the decision on further fate of the building becomes especially relevant. And finally, about the City and War project, very briefly, given the importance of preserving and rethinking Ukraine's cultural heritage in times of war, in March 2022, my colleagues from VN Karazin Kharkiv National University and I launched a new research project called City and War Destruction, Preservation, and Rethinking of the Cultural Heritage of Large Cities of Southeastern Ukraine during the Russian military aggression. The project is being implemented with the support of Modern Ukraine Studies program. I'm a fellow of the support of the Canadian Institute of Ukrainian Studies. And this project is a continuation of a prior project me and my colleagues implemented since 2015. This is the City Face project. I'm not going to go into too much details, but it was a very fruitful work, and one of the results of the City Face project was the publication of the collective monography, which combined 42 authors, researchers from Ukraine, and the reviewers were the scholars from Ukraine, Canada, Germany, and Poland. This book is available in the public access, and I invite you to review it. So this project was a good foundation for the City and War project. The main research focus of the new project is to investigate and rethink various aspects of the cultural heritage of the major cities of Eastern and Southern Ukraine, Dnipro, Donetsk, Zaporizhia, Odessa, and Kharkiv. After the outbreak of the war, and the purpose of this project is to record the views of experts on the processes of destruction, preservation, and rethinking of urban cultural heritage. We have already collected more than 10 interviews with Ukrainian experts. 8 of them have been published on our YouTube channels, so I invite you to watch the videos. The City and War project is an open network of mostly Ukrainian university professors and students. We work in the close cooperation. I'm the leader of this project, and me and my colleagues, we attempt to work as part of several thematic groups. In particular, we try to arrange certain events for discussion of these topics. Ukrainian cultural heritage is facing under condition of war. For example, on November 10th, 2022, we had one of such events. It was a round table on preservation, transformation of historical memory, history, politics, and memories. The video of the round table is also available on YouTube. The participants of the City and War project publish research on cultural heritage of Ukrainian cities. In particular, the project includes a special issue of professional journal Bulletin of Kharkiv National University, a history series, which include 9 articles and 4 reports. And in March, we have finished this work on the special issue, and this issue, it contains the research of relevant issues related to, of course, various issues and challenges faced by the cultural heritage, and dedicated to the cultural modern media representation of Ukrainian citizens and their cultural heritage, specific of activities of museum, archives, and libraries during the war, current challenges for the educational sector and cultural and artistic life has faced during the Russian military aggression. The City and War project will last at least until the end of 2023, and we plan to continue collecting interviews with experts in the field of cultural heritage, as well as discussing relevant topics of preservation and rethinking cultural heritage. And right now we are updating the website project, including database where we publish information about cultural heritage sites, including the state register of real estate monuments of Ukraine. In particular, we are trying to record their current state. So this is all. Thank you so much for your attention, and I will be happy to hear your comments and questions.
Дуже дякуємо вам за блискучу
Thank
доповідь.
you very much for such a presentation.
Чи ви чули мене, пане Євгене? Дуже дякуємо вам.
Do you hear me? Yeah, okay.
Дякую. Дякуємо за блискучу
Thank you for such a brilliant report, and we can start discussing it. I see that Professor Govindan is ready to ask a question.
Okay, can you hear me? I should apologize. Rostislav Melnikov was before me, so he should go first, and then I will follow.
That's okay.
Так, я не помітила. Дякую. Нічого.
It's okay. It's okay. You can go.
Okay, Yevhen, this presentation was brilliant. I have been studying cities and heritage and destruction for years, and I learned so much from this, even more than in our previous conversations. We're in the middle of a war, and there's plenty to worry about. But even before the war, I think in Ukraine, as in Kazakhstan, which you know I study, there was a problem of changing property rights that affected how people thought about cultural heritage. So I wonder whether you think the war has changed the politics and the attitude toward property rights such that there is more support among elites for preserving and maybe reconstructing monuments and such. So it's a tiny question with big implications. But once again, thank you for such an excellent presentation.
Гарнера, я вам дякую за
I thank you for our communication during this year, this academic year. I will be speaking Ukrainian. We have an interpreter, so this is an interesting question, and it's very complex, obviously. Considering control, the question of control has intensified due to the big number of civilian initiatives which started to appear since 2014. And after the 21st of February, these initiatives, these are some specific projects, just headquarters teams, which are united around some aim, either to help the museums, archive libraries, to provide them with materials, or the teams united to develop digital projects to monitor heritage. So monitor, when we talk about it, it seems a bit strange. I understand that in the United States, the situation is better, but in Ukraine, it's a really bad situation with recording the items of cultural heritage. We do not have any information resource on it. If you ask me what is the number of those items, nobody could answer you. And nobody will say in which condition they are. So I just gave approximate numbers, and what percentage has good condition and what percentage was damaged is very complicated. That's why we are developing this digital infrastructure nowadays. We are talking about a big resource which will improve the monitoring possibilities. But very often it is done at the expense of civilian initiatives or international cooperations. And the basis for new ecosystem, we must use the Polish experience. Cooperation with Polish peers is ongoing. They help us with their experience, with the tools, for example, digitalized. So these are also the items of international cooperation. So a lot is based on such international and civilian initiatives. Considering the ownership rights, it's even more complicated issue, because I gave you the example of Kiev-Pechersk Lavra, where we saw the reverse process when the country is trying to return the possibility of control, full control, and do it quicker and more efficiently. So they are talking about it at least. And the pictures of this bad condition of some sites in Lavra, they are signify, so the ministry is talking a lot about that. So the aim is really to bring everything to order and to return Lavra under the governmental control. On the other side, we can hear a lot interviews, a lot of discussions where the representatives of the cultural heritage protection area of lower level say about the adverse process. They say that under war, we have a little money to protect cultural heritage, and it would be good to privatize, actually. It's like to give those sites under control, sell them, some sites. And I have heard some of these interviews with the representatives of Lviv, agencies of control, who are saying that we are ready, we have the mechanism how to give such rights to investors. But there is a question under Ukrainian reality. If the registration of such objects was still on very low level, how will it be happening now? Will the situation get even worse? Maybe we will not even have the access to some sites if some investors will be controlling those objects. Or Ukraine has no effective mechanism of punishment for the damage which is given to the heritage sites. So this is the problem which the National Institute of Strategic Research is talking about. If something is damaged, let's say a fresco in the castle, or they will remove some nice staircase of the 18th century, who will be responsible for that? How should it be happening? Now these issues are very complex. On the control and ownership rights, we can see here some discussion, broad discussion. And the main problem we are facing now is the challenges connected with the aggression and the problems which existed before war or before 2014. They did not disappear. They are still here. And we have to look for the answers to both these types of problems. So we have a lot of challenges, and this is a big one for the cultural heritage of Ukraine. So I hope I could answer your question.
Дуже дякуємо, пане Євгене, за таку
Thank
детальну
you,
відповідь.
Mr.
Пане
Yevgen, for
Ростислав,
such a
будь ласка,
detailed
прошу,
answer.
одразу
And
запитання.
Mr. Rostislav, your
Я вас
question?
прошу.
I wanted to say thank you for such an interesting research and for the initiatives initiated and realized by you. They are very important. So my question is adjacent to your topic. So this is decolonization in view of the Kharkiv National University of Karazin, which in information space, especially historical department, due to Professor Kudelka is stating pro-Russian interests and pro-Moscow interests, anti-Ukrainian. Kudelka in Toponymic Commission in the Kharkiv issue, plus the new rector. We know that her father was one of the leaders of Russian separatists, plus some scandals on the eve of full-scale invasion. The question is, has the atmosphere changed in Karazin University during this year? I think it's you're working like in online mode, but maybe there are some movements. And what direction? Are they positive or negative? Thank you for your question. I cannot decommunize the university, and now we are based in Chernivtsi, but your question is important. I agree. My colleagues and me, we are trying what you said to work over these issues and analyzing it in terms of benefit for the university. We are trying to unite our efforts to research these issues. Considering the change of atmosphere, of course, it has changed. It started to change since 2013-14 with the European Revolution. Now in Kharkiv, we have ombudsman, language ombudsman, student language ombudsman who take different signals. Maybe somebody is demonstrating pro-Russian behavior, but I don't know. I'm not aware of any unusual cases. I cannot say anything about the ombudsman or their opinions. Just we are not aware of any cases of some scandal that somebody was not using Ukrainian language while teaching at the university. If we have such cases, then with all the mechanisms we have now, they will be punished in some way, or they will have to resign, because our university is not an exception to the general tendency. But Sergei Mikhailovich continues to work, and he shows these pro-Russian narratives. We are working together on the same chair. I cannot say anything about pro-Russian narratives. I haven't heard anything of this kind from him. I have been working there since 2017, and I haven't heard of such narratives. I heard that he expressed such things before, but now that's actually a very painful question for Kharkiv. You understand that this is the city which is on the front line, and these are very painful issues for us. Sorry that I took some of your time. No, that's an interesting question, but for me it would be more interesting to talk about cultural heritage, not about the professors who work in our university, because there are about 2,000 professors who work there.
Дуже дякую, пане Євгене.
Thank you, Mr. Yevgen, very much. Dear colleagues, we have one question in chat, And one more question from Dora, but I think that we have run out of the time. Mr. Yevgen, could you give answers to colleagues directly? I think we can now get to our next speaker, if you are not against.
Так, спасибі вам велике. Мгм.
Yes, I will write my answers in the chat. Thank you.